In this video, I want to talk with you a little bit about false god worship and the history of false god worship and how that lent itself to pagan Christianity, counterfeit Christianity. So as you're reading the word, you often are going to see things like the other day I uploaded a video about tree worship in the Bible. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about how certain tree worship came to be. You hear about Asherah poles, and you hear about pagan sacrifices, human sacrifices, passing your child through the fire. And you even see stories like Ruth's story, where people were super brainwashed into thinking that it was honorable for them to be sacrificed. Children being raised to present themselves as a human sacrifice and to desire that, to want to die for their false god. So the other day, someone said to me that Jesus and Christianity have pulled from paganism. Pulled from paganism. I don't know where they're coming from with this. I don't know if they're coming from the perspective of some of the things that we talk about, like being a living sacrifice to Christ, that many of us are going to die, that we are supposed to endure even unto death. But what this person was claiming was that Christianity has pulled from paganism, not that paganism and Satan is attempting to covet God, his glory, what he does, what he's established, what's important to him, in order to distort it into and pervert it into something disgusting. For example, in human sacrifices, it was believed that excessive violence actually gave more satisfaction to the gods. Whereas the way that God has taught us to sacrifice, or taught the Israelites to sacrifice, if they were doing things correctly, the animal wouldn't have even felt it. They were taught to do things in a very specific way and to treat one another with decency, including the animals that they were sacrificing. For example, during the Passover, you are to take this lamb. It's going to live with you for 14 days. You're going to care for this lamb. But this is not what we see in satanic sacrifice. For example, look at the difference between the way that Elijah prayed to the true God, while the priests of Baal were dancing around and slashing themselves and doing all of these crazy things, screaming out. Elijah didn't have to do that. He just had to believe in God and call on God and know that he would do what he was asking him to do. Know that he would reveal his glory. So again, I'm always telling you, don't lean on your own understanding with regard to what God has established. Don't think that God established marriage so that then he could model our marriage with him after human marriage. That's ridiculous. He's the one God. He establishes things for his purpose, and Satan will try to mimic. Just like, what is Satan trying to do right now? Is he trying to covet marriage? Is he trying to covet the creation? He takes what God establishes and he perverts it into something disgusting. The Celts believed that their gods could help control disasters and plagues, the very things that God sends. So think about the way that we do things today. We calling on human experts, false gods, to control the things that God sends, the disasters and the plagues, rather than perceive what God's doing, that he sends these things to contend with us. They contrived false gods as their way of controlling the situation. They would rather believe that spirits dwell among them, in the trees, in the wind, in the water, in the volcanoes. You see how well that worked for the people who were lifting up their god, just so happened to be the very volcano in Pompeii that killed them. It didn't work out so well for them. So they would sit in nature and they would believe that their God was in a tree. Their God was in the wind. Their God was in the water, the river. They would look for omens in nature to tell them what their gods were doing. Kind of like Mother Nature. You hear that on the news? Even Christian broadcasting stations or broadcasting stations that claim that they are Christians speak on behalf of Mother Nature, pay homage to Mother Nature than to God. Boy, Mother Nature just has her ways, doesn't she? So the Celts offered sacrifices to their gods, and then they hoped for a response. And the nature of their sacrifices were cold and calculated. They were not decent. There was no order. It was their sort of contract with the gods. And human sacrifices, as we see happening in places like Africa, places like Iran, human sacrifices were seen as the ultimate sacrifice, giving a life in order to save them. What do you see happening now? A life for a life. Abortion, the selfishness of killing your baby to save yourself, organ harvesting, mutilation of the gender that God created you to be, trafficking, and all kinds of abuse. All kinds of abuse, especially on children, are forms of sacrifice. And as I mentioned to you earlier, violence was seen to give more satisfaction to the gods. Are these God's ways? Or is this Satan's sick and twisted perversion of what God has established? Is this Satan's pathetic way that he's always trying to covet what God has established? Always trying to distort and confuse and deceive what God desires. And these people were always worried about getting it right. There was always a sense of fear, no peace, no rest, no sense of being in the right standing with their gods, working off of a fear of punishment. And what does John tell us? Love has no fear, because perfect love drives out fear. If we're afraid, it is because of a fear of punishment. And this is because we have not been perfected in love. That's 1 John 4:18. So there's no way that this could be from God. Now listen, I can go through all of the explanations, but if you truly have a relationship with God and you've truly experienced him and you've tasted the heavenly gift, then you're going to know that there is no way that Jesus was modeled after paganism. You're going to know by his spirit and by that experience of relationship with him that he is true and that he is God and that there is only one God, and that if Jesus is true, then the Bible is true and God the Father is true, and everything that has been written in that book and is taught by his servants through their testimony, you're going to know that it's true because God will speak into your spirit by his spirit. All I'm doing is giving you context, but I'm not the one who can convince you. You have to receive it from him. And for those who do not, such as the person who claimed that Jesus is modeled after paganism, they're not his. Anyone who believes that is not a child of God. They are a child of the devil. They are anti-Christ, and that is the spirit that dwells in them. The Celts also burnt a wicker man, like this giant wicker man in a field with mass human sacrifices inside of this wicker man. Ever heard of Burning Man? You know, years ago, I had lunch with someone I knew when I was growing up, and she was always doing really evil things, totally lawless. And I think I made the mistake of thinking like maybe she had grown up. I don't know. I didn't have discernment at the time either. But we had this lunch, and she and I were probably in our 30s. And she was dating a man who was significantly older than her, like a sugar daddy kind of thing. And she proceeded to tell me about this Burning Man festival, I don't know what you call it, that they would go to, and was trying to convince me that I should go too, that this was a good, fun thing. A bunch of people who run around naked, have orgies, and they're on drugs. And you know, quite frankly, I don't care. People who do those things, if they want to go into the desert and do that and burn some straw man and think that they are paying homage to something, they can all just fall into a big pit for all I care. Even before I was in Christ, I knew that was wrong. But the next thing she told me, excitedly, no doubt, was that the city lets us do it because people bring their kids. And so it's documented as a family event. And I flipped my cookies, and I never spoke to her again. But I first let her know what I thought of that, how disgusting it was that she would think that it was okay to sacrifice the safety and security and morality of children so that they could act out their disgusting perversions on each other and expose little children to that. So let me tell you what they do. They burn a straw man in the middle of the desert. They live in tents, have orgies, do drugs, and apparently they bring their children along for this. Do you think we've somehow evolved from what the Celts were doing or others in the Bible? These sickening, disgusting things are still happening. So these were the practices of the Celts. And then later on, in Rome, the gods took visible human form. They erected statues of the political deities and imperial cult. And this continued to go on until about the 4th decade AD, until Christ showed up and Christianity began. So up until this time, as you can imagine, people were looking for a personal God, a practical faith, not something that they just offered to and waited to see whether it was good enough, never knowing what standing they were in, and nothing ever making sense. and being in this satanic bondage or bowing down to a statue that didn't interact with them. And Christianity was beginning to spread. And that brought a challenge to Satan, didn't it? It brought a challenge to Rome as a political entity, and it brought a challenge to Satan because what he had established was being replaced. And the world of pagan gods had to adapt in order to deceive and not to die out. This is why Constantine developed counterfeit Christianity, pagan Christianity, because now he could have the best of both worlds. He could have the support of Christians, and he could have the support of the world, the pagan world. Do we say that now? Oh, we should just be all inclusive. We're all talking about the same God, the God of the universe, higher power. You can just pick whatever God you want. So now even British paganism began adapting Christianity, quote unquote Christianity. And they joined a mystery cult devoted to a single deity. But in order to do that, they had to pass initiation rites. And the most demanding was the cult of Cybele. I've talked about the cult of Cybele, but I was saying the name wrong. I was referring to it as the cult of Cybele because that's kind of how it's spelled. So I'm sorry about that. If you've listened to previous videos where I talked about this, or if you were pronouncing it that way from a soul aligned, because I talk about this in a soul aligned. The goddess's name is Cybele. She's no one, so who cares? Who cares what we call her, right? Kamala, Cybele, Cybele. So the most demanding was the cult of Cybele. This is a fertility goddess, the goddess of Mother Earth, sound a little like Mother Nature, who's also called Mother Earth. And one of the requirements of the priests were to castrate themselves. And in A Soul Aligned, I talk about how, ironically, when they castrated themselves, they understood that they were going to receive more power rather than less. Oh no, did God really say you can't eat that fruit? Well, he knows that you're going to receive knowledge, that your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God. You recognize the schemes of the devil? The story of Cybele is that she's in love with Attis, but Attis falls for another woman. She starts fighting him, she's filled with rage, and Attis goes off and does the unthinkable. He castrates himself and he bleeds to death. But thankfully, Cybele is a goddess, so she's able to resurrect him. She doesn't resurrect him into a man, but she resurrects him in the form of a pine tree, like a Christmas tree, or any number of trees that I talked about in the video on tree worship earlier this week. So Cybele offered eternal salvation through this resurrection, and the tree became a source of worship and power and ritual in her honor. Now, as I was listening to this in a documentary, because really I'm kind of taking the historical events I'm talking with you about, this comes from a documentary, but the comments that I'm making are to help you understand the connection to what is written in the Bible, what we are told today that we think, oh no, we don't worship trees. No, we just set up trees in our houses to a pagan holiday. Oh no, I don't practice Yule, the German festival Yule, a lawless festival in which a Yule log or a tree was dragged into a city by a bunch of lawless people and then burned for 12 days, kind of like the 12 days of Christmas or the Burning Man. No, I don't observe that. I just venerate the Yule log during Christmas because it's just so cozy. I set up a lighted shrine to the Yule log. Oh no, I don't celebrate Saturnalia. I just go to parties and exchange gifts. I claim that Christmas is a celebration of the sun, S-O-N, even though the Romans say that it's a celebration to the sun, S-U-N, who also, by the way, is described as one who was birthed by a virgin, a shepherd, the deity of covenant, light, oath, justice, and the sun. Sound familiar? So in the 4th century, when Constantine won the battle at the Milvian Bridge, the battle that he had with Maxentius, pagan Christianity became the official religion of Rome almost overnight. Pagan Christianity, which people say, oh, Christianity is the most practiced religion in the world. No, it's not. That's not Christianity. Babylon is the most practiced religion in the world. Paganism is the most practiced religion in the world. Christianity is practiced by the few that have been chosen, the few who actually worship him in spirit and in truth, because there's no way that Christians could be practicing these things and be connected to the vine. There's no way that they received that from him. And 3 centuries after Constantine, Augustine was dispatched by the Pope to convert the heathen Britons. And in Europe at that time were the Norwegian berserkers. You know that word, berserk? These were unruly, lawless warrior gangs that worshipped the false god Odin. And I don't really care about their story, to be honest. I don't care much about any false god story, but the reason I'm talking to you about this is because I want you to be able to see what Satan distorts, and I don't want you to be confused when someone says to you what was said to me the other day, which is Jesus was modeled after paganism. We may not have known what all was going to be unfolded, but Satan knew, and he's not all-knowing, but he knows enough about God to where he would distort these things that were important to him, these things that God had already begun establishing with regard to sacrifice, with regard to the Messiah who was to come. And by this time in history, had already come. And so now, having just a little bit more information, like John's vision, the Vikings had a similar story that there would be a great battle, but that something greater was waiting for them. What a twist on reality. And it just shows the delusional nature of the devil. There's going to be a great battle, and that spirit that they've been submitted to, who never gives them any peace, can't give them any peace, compels them by a feeling and spirit of fear, always afraid of punishment. He's somehow going to give you something better, like at any point? No, at no point does he have any intention of giving his servants anything better, nor could he. But he wouldn't either way. He is bent on conquest. That's what we see in Revelation when talking about the seals. What is that? Chapter 6 of Revelation, talking about the seals. There's a rider that comes out and he's bent on conquest. That's the devil. The rider later on has many crowns. This one only has one. He's given permission for a period of time as the Antichrist. That's his crown. The rider later has many crowns. His name is Faithful and True, and he's not bent on conquest. With justice, he wages war. But this one, in Revelation 6, the Antichrist with the one crown who's bent on conquest, once he conquers, once he steals, he will finish it up with killing and destroying. That's his agenda. So it's interesting because there's always this promise of something that's never achieved with these false gods. They never have any satisfaction. They never feel any peace. They are compelled by fear of punishment. But God doesn't do that with us. He doesn't make us comfy, but he does prove to us who he is. He does give us a taste of the heavenly gift so that we know what we're fighting for, so that we know and pursue and fight for and endure and pant for that heavenly gift, because we've had a taste and there's nothing like it. We know the treasure and we sell everything we have and go buy that land so we can have that treasure, that pearl. But they don't even know what that something greater is. The best they can hope for is what we used to hope for when we were of the world, and that's flesh gratification. That is the very best that we can hope for, that thing that we thought, oh, if I just have this, then I'll be happy. And you never are. They don't know. They don't know any better because they haven't tasted it. That's the reward that they crave because it's all they know. How sad. All of these pagan practices, winter solstice, Christmas, spring equinox, Easter, Mary, venerating Mary, who stands for the Virgin Mother of Mithra. Paganism lives on in counterfeit Christianity, but it's going to come to its end. So when you hear God talk over and over about Babylon, the cover, what's it covering? Covering paganism. And what's he covering it with? Counterfeit Christianity. When you hear God talk about Babylon and relent over thousands of years about how Babylon is going to come to its end, now you know why. Now you know why he's that angry. Now you know why his wrath is going to come. Why he will leave her exposed and naked and turn everyone against her. Why people will stand far off and mourn and weep and wail at her destruction, terrified at what's about to happen to them. Now you know. And it's only a matter of time. And God keeps saying that Babylon will be destroyed. In 1 hour, her doom will come. But why does he tell you to come out of her? Why does he tell you that you have to separate from her if you're going to be saved? And that if you don't come out of her, that you will bear in her plagues? Why does he say that? Because as much damage as Babylon has done, if he causes you to taste of that heavenly gift, if he opens that door to bring you into that covenant and you reject it, you reject him the way that King Saul did, you take him for granted and you just go do your own thing, How can you escape his wrath? If you're placing others before him, if you're placing things before him, he's an afterthought in your life. You can't make time for him. It's too hard. How will you escape his wrath? Because he didn't say this was going to be easy. He said, many are called and few are chosen. So anyone saying that Christianity is the most practiced religion in the world, anyone who believes that has not come into the light. They have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea what true Christianity is. They have been deceived by all of these things that the devil planted long ago that have defiled the temple of God. Pagans who took over God's people. You understand what happened in that second temple during the Feast of Dedication, or what the Feast of Dedication represents, rather. That the Greeks had come in, they had defiled the temple, there were sacrifices going on, pigs that were being slaughtered and sacrificed, false gods, statues, disgusting, detestable things that were going on in God's temple. And what were the people around doing? Most people were not concerned. Most people were saying, you know what? You can't beat them, join them. Yeah, we're not allowed to celebrate Sabbath. We're not allowed to observe Sabbath, read the Torah, do anything that God has commanded, perform the sacrifices that he has commanded. But we're kind of tired of living that way anyway. It's a lot of work. How about we justify ourselves by this? How about we just call it Hellenistic Judaism? How about we just adapt their pagan principles and we'll just call it Catholicism or Christianity? No one will know. God doesn't see. But I really like these things. But I really like Christmas. But how will I live? How will I explain this to other people? I'm not really bothered by it that much. I just celebrate it to him. You know, I said that before, and God had to bring me into understanding. You don't celebrate a pagan holiday to him. But my heart had to be changed in order to hear that. If you are hearing from God, as Paul says, if his invitation to enter his rest still stands, don't fall short of it. Don't ignore his voice as our ancestors did in the wilderness when many of them died as a result of rejecting him. If you're hearing him now, there's not that much time. Return to him and he will return to you. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.